Started. So the recording has started, and welcome to this session on equity in contracting, where our goal today is to talk about strengthening partnerships between funders and small local evaluation firms. My name is Julia Kaufman. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Evaluation Innovation, a co-host of this session. So my organization, in addition to many others, has been looking at how evaluation in philanthropy in particular can be more aligned with and in service to equity. This question applies to why we do evaluation, how we do it, and whose questions and voices are prioritized in the process. It also applies to who is evaluating and the processes by which evaluators are identified and selected, which is the topic that brings us all here today. A couple of years ago, Carlisle Levine from BLE Solutions and Hippolyte Pull from the Institute for Peace and Development approached me about doing some field building work on how standard funding and contracting practices often stand in the way of success for small, solo, and local evaluation firms. And as to small firms themselves, they were seeing firsthand some barriers to competing for and winning assignments because of a number of operational constraints, but also because the processes of developing RFPs, posting them, deciding who wins them, and then contracting for them were set up in ways that tended to favor larger, more established evaluation firms based primarily in the global north. The field was sort of stuck in this vicious cycle of success to the successful. So Carlisle and Hippolyte really took it upon themselves to lift up this issue in the field and wrote an open letter to funders that explores how funding and contracting practices are getting in the way, and importantly, offered a set of recommendations to go along with them. If you haven't seen this open letter, it's on the CEI website, and we'll put a link in the chat. So if you haven't seen it, you can quickly find it. So now Hippolyte and Carlisle are organizing a set of conversation like today's that bring funders and evaluators into conversations about how to make practices more equitable, what's been tried, so that we can bring some of these recommendations and very practical recommendations to light. So this is the second webinar on this topic. There will be more in the future. Back in May, we explored why this issue was important and talked to several funders and evaluators working with the Hewlett Foundation, Sierra Health Foundation, and Conrad and Hilton Foundation on their experiences related to this topic. So today's session, which is specifically on the evaluator selection process, will feature more of these conversations with funders and evaluators working with the Ford Foundation and American Jewish World Service. We'll hear first from Hippolyte to introduce the topic, then we'll turn to the panel, and then devote a good amount of time to questions and answers. So we encourage you to use the chat function liberally to post comments or questions as we go. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hippolyte. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for setting us up. And thank you all again for coming to participate in this very important workshop, the second in a series that we're setting up. Would like to recognize and thank the Ford Foundation and the Center for Evaluation Innovation for helping us along, bring us this far. We've received a lot of support in many ways that has enabled us to come this far and to have this webinar. So my name has already been mentioned, Hippolyte Pull. I work out of Ghana, always been out of Ghana, and my colleague Carlisle Levine, that you'll be seeing soon, is based in the US. Carlisle and I first met while we were working for Catholic Relief Services many years ago in the 1990s. She was based in the US, I was still based in Ghana. And then we went our separate ways and then found ourselves running our separate institutions, doing evaluations, and research in many ways. So in the process, we're all running our separate small firms, but we came together at some points to do work together. And in those processes, we started sharing experiences of, how do we get to work with the large foundations and multilaterals and so forth, because of the challenges we faced getting selected, for assignments that we thought were very well suited to do. And so we started sharing those experiences, and we said, wait a minute, probably we aren't the only ones having these experiences. How about if we put our experiences on paper and share that with other people to see if that resonates, or is it that we're just the two people crying in the wilderness? And so we put together our ideas, thanks to Julia for supporting us, and that got published, and you have a link to that report. That report generated a lot of interest, we found out, from people, from founders of evaluations, from commissioners of evaluations, from small firms like us. And so we thought that the best way to keep the conversation going and deepening is to organize a series of webinars, where all of you, thanks all you for coming, will come in, hear what we learned, share your ideas, and then hopefully we can all begin to deepen that learning. This is why it's very exciting for us today to host this second of the series, which is focusing on the selection process in evaluating contracting. Last, as Julia mentioned, the last webinar was on the why. Now we want to focus specifically on the processes for selecting evaluations and how that impacts on the ability of small firms like us to be part and parcel of the evaluation process, to be able to offer our talents and our special gifts in those spaces, and so forth. So this is why we are very excited about this. We will be going through this with some of people who have, helped us along in thinking through this. So we have a panel that will come today. These are panelists from funding agencies and small organizations that have worked in partnership before. We want to be able to learn from their experiences, what works, what didn't work, what can be improved, and how do we deepen that as we move along. So during this, somebody talking? So during this period, we'll have two sets of people that we are going to be specifically focusing on, as I said, the selection process. But we'd like to provide some clarity on the concept of local and solo, which is the basis of our self-definition. When we talk about local evaluation firms, what we mean basically is not a geographical local alone. Yes, that's very important, that being geographically local in terms of rooted in the country, region, or community is critically important. But we also recognize that local can mean thematic. Are you grounded in the field that you're looking at? Are you best suited to do the evaluation in the field, whether it's in governance, agriculture, peace building, and so forth? So not only being physically local, but also being thematically well versed in that area, in that field. So if, for instance, we were to do an evaluation on communication, and looking at the role of media in peace building, for instance, is it anybody who comes from Ghana that can do the evaluation? Or do we need, in addition to that local context, somebody who has the knowledge of how journalism works in that context, and therefore can bring into being the insights from that specific field? There are also issues of generational locals. If you were to do an evaluation of young people, you might want to understand their language. You might want to be familiar with the spaces in which they operate. You might want to be very familiar with the issues that they want to deal with. So we couldn't just pick anybody because you happen to be geographically local and think that you are the best fit. So there'll be a combination of that. And then also the cultural context is important. And this will also add language. So the fact that I'm an expert in peace building may not qualify me to go and do an evaluation in a place where Spanish is the major language when I don't speak Spanish. So that linguistic local is very important. And those are aspects that we'd like to emphasize as we look at the selection processes in evaluation and what are the challenges, what are the prospects, and what are frankly, the advantages for including this kind of diversities of contextual knowledge in the selection process. To do this, we have today two people from the Ford Foundation, and our partners, and then the American Jewish Society as well. So we have Kelsey from the Ford Foundation, Kelsey Simpsons, to help us. And we have Margot Molinex for the American Jewish Wealth Service, who will also be working with us on this thing. We are blessed also to have Giovanni Austin Ingram, who is staying up late, in faraway Indonesia to be part of this. Thank you so much, Gio, for being there for us. And we have Lindsay Greenbaba, who will also be joining us, for the US. So these will be our panelists. One more person that we had expected to come will be able to make it because of issues in her home country. So together, we are going to have a conversation. We will first ask questions to each of the panelists, to which they will respond, and once we are done with the questions from each panelist, we'll encourage the panelists to have conversations among themselves. If somebody on the panel says something that you would like to add on to, you would like to expand, you would like to interrogate, the panelists are welcome to have that conversation among themselves. And once they are done having that conversation, then the rest of us can jump in with questions, with contributions, with our thoughts, with our comments, so we can all together work to deepen this conversation. So this is how we laid it out, and I'll turn it over to Caroline to take us through the next sessions. Caroline?
Thanks so much, Hippolyte. That was a great introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here with our panelists today. So why don't we bring in our panelists, Gio and Lindsay, Kelsey and Margot, so we can see everybody. And so once we have everybody here, we're going to start with questions for you all. And we're going to start with Gio and Lindsay, our small local evaluation firms. And then we're going to go to Kelsey and Margot. So Gio, as we're waiting for Lindsay and Margot to join in here, our question to you as we start, Gio, is this, and Lindsay, the same question will come to you. You both partnered with the Ford Foundation. What we want to know is about the Ford Foundation's evaluation firm selection process. What is it that facilitated your bidding on and winning an evaluation contract with Ford? And how is this different from other experiences you've had with other clients? And what difference did it make to you? So Gio, over to you, and then we will ask Lindsay to answer the same question. Then we'll have a similar question for Kelsey and Margot.
Okay, thank you, Carlisle, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Gio Austriningrum, and I'm based in Bandung, Indonesia. I'm a researcher and evaluator at Dala Institute for Environment and Society. And Rod, my colleague, and the Ford Evaluation Project team leader is also here, and it's also almost midnight in his time zone. So yeah, maybe we can converse more later, but I will briefly go through the processes of the Ford's Natural Resources and Climate Change, or Ford NRCC evaluation, advertisement, application selection, and contracting as our conversation starter. And as Carlisle said, highlight what we think is very helpful in the bidding and selection processes. So first, Dala knew about the job as the job was broadly advertised on LinkedIn and other common platforms that we monitor, and the budget and the expected scope of work was transparently informed in the advertisement. So that was very helpful, and there is no guesswork about whether we will over budget and etc. And some of the points that made us feel comfortable, welcome, and attracted to the call is that first, it was specifically inviting applicants from the Global South to do evaluation of a program that are mostly done in Global South context. And we think that this lends to an orientation to decolonization, which we really appreciate at DALA. Framed as a conversation to actually allow us a space to discuss that we are qualified. For example, Ford said that they're not looking for a long pitch proposal, and they're more to see if we're fit to partner together. And then if we fit, then we can have a discussion together. And this is very important for small evaluation firms like us. So the proposal was then not too onerous and was more of a start of a conversation to refine the concepts. And we have enough time to work on the proposal, which was around a month, and there was enough information provided through the background documents. And this lead time was very important for DALA because we don't have people in all countries for DALA stuff, right? So we had to assemble a team through our networks and through calls for consultants, which takes time. And we also think that for a funder to organize a webinar to help out about the call was very helpful. And in fact, DALA met some of the independent and regional country evaluators in the webinar session. And next, content-wise, we think that evaluation principles, orientation, learning purpose, it's aligning well with DALA's niche values and capacities. And what we think is very helpful is that they said that they were looking for a thought partner. And throughout the evaluation processes that we can discuss later, we can feel that Ford really considered DALA as a thought partner throughout the processes. And moving on to the application and selection process, when we were working on and submitting the proposals, there were spaces for dialogues and comments on the evaluation questions and assumptions itself. And this is very rare in evaluation context, as many of you perhaps know. And we were also invited on an interview, and Ford sent the interview questions ahead before. And in the session, we got to clarify the scope of work. And perhaps Kelsey can comment more on later whether Ford asked for proof of management and financial capacities. But
hello, good day, good evening. Calling from Nigeria.
Yeah. So hello? Can I continue? Okay, sorry. And yeah, basically we sensed that Ford was more interested in who we were and what we can do. And that we sensed that they valued that we're placed in the Global South, and our country and regional consultants are also rooted in the Global South. So that also transpires to the contracting processes. It was fast and easy practically and technically. And the work began only after the contract was signed, and there were no funny or difficult requests. Like we had experience in which we have to send printed documents and wet signatures, and we didn't have that with Ford. So I think, yeah, those are the starting points to wrap up that Ford's collaborative attitude and orientation, we think were very helpful throughout the processes. So yeah, looking forward to discussing with you all, and back to you, Carlisle. Thank you.
Gio, thanks a ton. That was fabulous. And Lindsay, you're another Ford partner, so it'll be interesting to hear how your experience compared to Gio's. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carlisle. And Gio, I'm going to attempt not to just repeat everything he said, but I'll kind of plus one just about everything in terms of transparency around budget and clarity on what the expectations were of the evaluation. But just to start for an introduction, Lindsay, I'm really honored and grateful to be part of this conversation today. I founded Impact Architects about 7 years ago. And we actually have 3 streams of work with a small team of now 4 people, but we actually work directly with newsrooms and media makers to help develop impact strategies and to bring social science research methods into how to understand the impact of journalism and media. My background's in political science, and our team all have backgrounds in different social science fields. We also do field building research, so research that's openly accessible, meant to provide tools and resources to folks in the field who are developing strategies or wanting to conduct their own research. And then our third pillar of work is that it's directly with philanthropy, and it's helping philanthropists that are newer into the media and journalism space to develop funding strategies, as well as ways to evaluate those strategies at the development of a portfolio, or, in the case of Forward, you have a 10-year strategy and they're at the midpoint of that strategy and wanting to do a portfolio review. But I'll say one of the things about the contracting process with Ford is that we received direct outreach as an invitation to apply, which made it feel like it was worth our time to do a proposal that was, I will say it was a staged proposal process. So first it was a letter of interest, but it still requires significant thought and familiarizing yourself with the portfolio. And so just really appreciated that it felt like this was going to be worth the effort to do. And I think at that time we were actually only 2 full-time staff people. And so for somebody to dedicate significant time to completing a proposal, you want to know someone's going to read it and take it seriously. So we appreciated that. And also, I think that's because there was a referral from another foundation we'd worked with previously. So Julie, in the beginning, mentioned success breeding success. And it certainly has been our experience that once you get a partnership with a foundation like Ford and can use them as a referral, that it really helps open doors in other places for their contracting processes as well. And through this conversation and preparing for this webinar, Kelsey actually reminded us that we actually didn't get the contract at first, which I had completely forgotten about because the working together process was so enjoyable that I totally forgot that we had a rejection letter at the beginning of the process. But it's because it was a very big evaluation. It was essentially, for not to get too in the weeds, but it was kind of like a 3-part portfolio. Actually, it was like 3 different strategies all wrapped into one evaluation. And then they came back to us about a month, I think, later and said, actually, we're going to kind of split it up. And we think, you might be a good fit specifically for the journalism program evaluation. And we said, yes, we would love to talk about that. And then very much in line with Gio's experience, it was very relational and conversational. So, there was clarity around what the evaluation was seeking to do, the questions that they were hoping to answer, how the information was going to be used. And through conversations, we were able to develop the scope of work and essentially a proposal that was going to, meet those needs, but felt very much like we had the ability to bring our expertise and experience to the process. And that's something else I'll say about this contracting process. It felt like there was a deep appreciation for the relationships that we had in the journalism and media space. And it can be a little bit tricky when, I mentioned one stream of our work is actually working directly with newsrooms and media makers. And so there were organizations in the portfolio that were also partners or clients of ours in the past. And so there was a need for everyone to just be transparent and be on the same page. But instead of that feeling like a challenge for this process, it felt very much like Ford appreciated that that was something we were going to be bringing into the evaluation, into the table, and that it would deepen the kind of depth of the evaluation and research that we were able to do. Yeah, so I think I'll wrap up with there. I'll just maybe kind of like add a postscript in line with Gio's as well, that the partnership and the relationship and the deep work I would say that Ford put into it didn't end, at the contracting phase, but in the actual execution of the evaluation, there continued to be deep relationship and partnership, and just appreciated that they contributed to the process and were very much partners in the work, and for but very hands-on. But that meant that we had clarity about what the expectations were for work products, what the expectations were around how the information would be presented so that it would be most useful to staff internally. And that was great because it meant we were able to turn around something hopefully that was in fact useful. And that always, I think, feels like very good from the perspective of an evaluator when a piece of work that you've spent a year on is actually going to be metabolized and used by an organization and not collect dust on the shelf.
Lindsay, thanks a ton. That was excellent. Okay, Kelsey, Margot, over to you in that order. And I have a question for you is about the practices that you all have put in place at Ford and American Jewish World Service to make your evaluation selection process more welcoming and inclusive of small local evaluation firms, whether that's proximate or geographic. And then how these practices you've put in place from your perspective have increased your ability to attract small local firms and what that has meant for your evaluations. So Kelsey, first to you, and then Margot to you.
Great. Thanks, Carlisle. And hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Simmons. I'm the Evaluation and Learning Officer at the Ford Foundation. I've been here about 4 years, and just a thank you to Gio and Lindsay. You know, I kind of feel like I'm getting hot from, you know, bringing some of my favorite people to speak about the great work that we've been able to do with them. And I hope later in the conversation we'll also be able to talk about where it hasn't worked as well, because I also don't want to paint this as Ford always getting it right all the time. We're absolutely on a journey, and I think we'll be able to speak a little bit more about that later on. But just before I answer your question, Carla, just to take a step back to talk about how we got to where we are, and I promise to keep it within 3 minutes, maybe 3.5. But the Office of Strategy and Learning that I'm part of serves as internal advisors, as Gio and Lindsay were talking about, to our program teams, as many on this call might be. So we guide them through strategy, monitoring, evaluation, learning, grant making support. And we're only about 8 years old. We came into being when our current president, Darren Walker, took over a few years after he took over and refocused Ford to focus on the drivers of inequality. And at that time, given our role, and with big credit to 2 of my colleagues on the call, our director, Bess Rothenberg, and our senior strategy and evaluation officer, Subarna Mathis, they really committed to not only asking about the question of inequality externally in the programming that we do, but thinking about what that meant for us internally in terms of how to address power imbalances and how we approach strategy, monitoring, evaluation, grant making. So today we're talking about evaluation, which we've only really been doing for about 5 years now. And some of what I'll speak to today is talking about where we are now, which is not where we were 5 years ago, and hopefully where we won't be in 5 more years from now. But we do, as I think Lindsay mentioned, we only do portfolio level evaluations. We don't do grant by grant evaluations intentionally. And so we do that at about the 5-year mark of a 10-year strategy. So with all of that in mind, bringing back to Carlisle, your question, you know, when we're thinking about what this means for evaluation, and specifically in the commissioning of evaluation, we went back to thinking about power and thinking about how to ensure that we're partnering not just with the most well-resourced firms, but prioritizing those who are best placed to answer questions related to our programs about how change happens. And as Hippolyte was talking about earlier, that means kind of thinking in local in a few different ways, not only geographically, but thematically, age, I appreciate him adding, but really who's best placed to answer those questions. And it also meant for us looking at power, not just only in who we hire, but in respecting the time of evaluators who are applying for these. Myself and my colleagues were evaluators previously before coming into philanthropy, and remember how long it takes to write an LOI or an RFP. So trying to be intentional about that, as well as casting our net as far as wide as possible and trying to make a very opaque process a little bit more transparent. So what we've done, and again, this has been where we are today, informed by feedback from folks like Gio and Lindsay and other evaluators that we ask after the process, what worked well, what didn't, how should we adjust? But as they mentioned, we do a 2-step process as much as possible. So we do put out the letter of interest as a first step, asking the basics of who they are and what is their experience. We try to limit it to 3 to 5 pages, again, knowing that it still works, but trying to make it easier. And actually recently, and we'll see if this works or not, we piloted doing a Google form versus an open call, because we realized that there's a lot of time that goes into designing and making things pretty that local and small firms often don't have the resources to, and that does sway opinions oftentimes. So maybe a Google form that is just a standard set of questions that also gets to what we really want to know, and not all the additional work that we could probably find on your website. We'll see how that works, but hopefully the internet is with us there. And we try to also be as transparent as possible in that LOI process about budget, about timeline, about the scope, asking what other questions we should be thinking about. And also, as I think Gio mentioned, trying to be as explicit as possible about the importance of representation of local on the evaluation team, and not just on the evaluation team, but in leadership of the evaluation team. So again, making sure that the teams are made up of folks that are most proximate to the issues that we share. We share that criteria up front in the LOIs, and we try to hold ourselves accountable to it. And then we do hold this webinar after the LOI is out, where it's a question and answer. And that's feedback we got from one of the evaluation firms after, of like, you all are a black box and it's very hard to understand what you're looking for. I know other donors do a Q&A where they answer questions. We don't internally have the bandwidth to do that. So we figured, let's do a 1-hour webinar, record it. It really is Q&A for 45 minutes. We give a little background on how we approach evaluation and what the program is about, but we leave it open to Q&A for the rest of the time. And then we send that webinar to anyone that couldn't come, and send it out as wide as possible. And then in saying no, we also try, for those firms that aren't best placed, to be as transparent as possible about why, why they weren't the right fit, why other firms fit a little bit better. And if there are opportunities to partner with them, which has happened for other work, or even to just, we appreciate the work they're doing and want to support it. We've had success supporting a few organizations in doing that. And above all, I think we're trying to, and I think Gio or Lindsay might have mentioned this too, be clear about wanting a thought partner. So not having all the questions laid out in advance, but really wanting someone that will push us, that will ask us questions, that feels like that relationship. And I appreciate them saying that it felt relational is there. And then we do have from there an RFP where we invite just 3 to 5 firms to apply based off the large number of LOIs that we receive. And we have an interview, and we try to be as transparent as possible about, again, our decision-making there. I know that I might be going beyond the 3 minutes, but just the last thing I'll say is where we struggle, and I do want to be transparent about that as well, and where I think we're continuing to try to improve is in the dissemination of the LOIs. We don't have a standard place like some bilateral and multilateral agencies where our evaluations, I think Margot and I were talking about this in the prep call, where we can kind of send the LOI. So we're continuously trying to think about where there are new spaces, and we welcome any feedback in this webinar and others, both about our LOI, but also about where we can post. We're very open to that. And also in the trade-off of the large scope of work for smaller evaluation firms, we do portfolio evaluations a lot. So oftentimes having to find firms that can handle a larger scope of work is the trade-off. And I appreciate Gio saying our contracting process was smooth, but it is not always. And it definitely takes time. And when our program teams want to start ASAP and our evaluators want to start as soon as possible, being transparent, right now it takes 6 to 8 weeks sometimes for that to really get off the ground, and building that into the timeline. So I'll stop there, but just an appreciation to be part of this conversation. And I think we're really looking forward to the conversation later on and getting feedback from how other folks are trying this.
Thanks a ton, Kelsey. Over to you, Margot.
Yes, I am so excited to be here with you all, and I've already gotten a lot of great ideas, and I'm excited to learn from everybody else that's joined today. It's a really wonderful conversation. So at American Jewish World Service, we work with social justice organizations around the world based on the understanding that the people who are most affected by the problems are best placed to work on those problems. So thinking about equity and power is core to our identity as a funder at American Jewish World Service. And so as Director of Strategic Learning, Research and Evaluation at AJWS, it's core to how I think about doing my work across the strategic learning, research and evaluation. When it comes to hiring consultants, as you've been hearing, I think it starts from the beginning. It starts with thinking about the RFP. +1 to a lot of these great ideas about really seeing the RFP as needing to be as detailed and as transparent as possible. So I know we've talked a little bit about having the budget included, the scope of work. I try and actually break down the scope into different phases of the evaluation. So for example, you can understand that I'm expecting about 2 days of work for the document review part of the evaluation. And what I'm trying to do is trying to give a realistic sense of the expectations for the evaluation so that consultants can get a sense of what is going to be expected in terms of the scope of the evaluation within the budget. And that I think is really helpful for deciding if it's a good fit or not, and understanding what we're looking for when we're thinking about the different proposals. I love all of these experimentations, and I'm excited to hear new ideas. I have been experimenting with translating the RFPs and not requiring English as a language justice effort. So maybe that's something we can talk about more if we have time later. And overall, I would say really trying to see the RFPs as a point of communication. So including not just the timeline for the evaluation project, but when I'm expecting to start reviewing applications, when I'm expecting to start interviewing. I try and do kind of a midway point to let people know if they haven't been moved forward in the process instead of making them wait until the very end of the process. The goal is really to post as long as possible, but to keep the kind of active recruitment interview process as short as possible. And so I think really seeing the RFP as a beginning place to start the dialogue with potential consultants. So everything in the RFP is something that we engage in conversation about, we refine, we really finalize together before it goes in any type of kind of contract form. Then when it gets time for the interview is where we really start thinking a lot about how we can shift power. And I'm really excited, again, if you have kind of best practices, formats that you've used, maybe questions that have worked really well, please share those in the chat. How have you been thinking about shifting power in your interview phase? Some things we've done, which were mentioned, are sharing the questions in advance. And we really structure our interviews to be dialogue. So for example, it's not just Q&A. I might ask the consultant, tell me about how you would work with program staff to refine the evaluation questions. But then we talk about it. We go back and forth, we dialogue, we really kind of engage in a conversation. Or maybe, tell me something about how you would think about doing the data collection in different types of communities. And again, it's really trying to start a dialogue and a back and forth in the interview process. And one thing that's really important for me is to use the interview as a way to understand who will be a good thought partner, but also who is values aligned. So I don't think that local is synonymous with equity. I'm actually looking for consultants who are interested in and of themselves in shifting power. So I'm looking to build a dialogue so I can understand if the consultants are thinking about shifting power in the evaluation design and the evaluation utilization. That needs to be a conversation that goes just beyond that local contextual expertise. And that's really what I'm thinking about in that interview process. I want to make sure we have time for audience questions and discussions. So I'll just wrap up by saying, I was trying to reflect back on the recent consultants I've hired. And I think the last 6 consultants I've hired have all had that local contextual or thematic expertise. But the reason why is because I have, in my qualifications, prioritized that as a value. So as incredibly well outlined in the paper, for all of those reasons, I see that as being a priority for my decision-making about who I hire. It's listed in the qualifications. And so when I'm making decisions, I put a lot of weight on having that local contextual thematic expertise, and really see that as being something that's important. And I think that's really important to note, that really prioritizing that value to inform your decision-making. So these processes support realizing that value, but in and of themselves, they don't mean that I hire somebody who is local. That is because I have prioritized that when I am making the decisions throughout this process. These are really to support realizing that value. Unfortunately, the consultant that I was hoping to join was not able to come today, so I'm sure they would have a lot of critical as well as positive feedback. So as Kelsey said, I think this is something that we're continuing to learn about and look forward to hearing from you all so we can think about increasing best practices around equity in this recruitment process. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our discussion.
Margo, great, thanks. Hippolyte, come on in, and there we go. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much to all the panelists for the wonderful ideas that you shared. I'm learning a lot and getting new terms that I would never have thought would be part of evaluation contracting processes. I've heard of participatory co-creation processes for even the scope of work, the transparency, and talking about even justice, language justice, making sure that you craft the terms in a language that people can understand. Localization has been come up, and even decolonization has come up as one of the things that people look for in evaluation contracting processes. Now, I'm sure all of you speaking, you are listening to each other's. Is there something that your colleagues said you would like to build on, you would like to query, you would like to expand on? So it's for the panelists, for the audience. We will have plenty of time for you to provide your input and your thoughts and so forth. But let's see if the panelists can have a discussion among themselves to expand on their ideas before we come to the plenary. So panelists, anyone who wants to go? As somebody says, if you don't volunteer, I will volunteer you. So who wants to go first? Margot, it looks like you didn't quite finish your thoughts and you were looking for opportunities to continue. So would you want to build off on any of the discussions that have gone on so far?
Right. Well, I appreciate the attention to challenges. So, these are some of the best practices that we've been trying to put in place to increase the ability of solo and local firms to apply. But I think, there are some tensions in the process. So, I was mentioning really wanting to think about this as a thought partnership from the start. We don't hand off a crafted evaluation. It's something that we really come in together from the start and think about building together. Which makes it difficult in the interview process to kind of think about how you can understand if it is a good fit when you don't say this is what we need you to do or what would you do. We aren't expecting them to have a fully developed concept at that point. So I think really trying to think about how you can really kind of build that relationship early on and think about what that looks like is something that's really key, but that's difficult to do. I was also reflecting on, where I've had success and where I've had failures. And, I definitely have had consultancies that have been amazing and consultancies that have not had the same level of success for different reasons. And I think that that's not necessarily based on if they are small or big. I think there are a lot of reasons. And so part of what I've been trying to do is just kind of recognize and accept that and really move away from striving for perfection and really thinking about, what are some different touch points where it makes sense to say, is this working? How can we open feedway throughout the process that goes both ways, creating lots of touch points to say, are we on track? Is this taking the amount of time we thought it would take? Is this design what we had kind of originally conceptualized? How's the data collection going? I think really making sure that there's a lot of opportunity throughout the consultancy to have those two-way feedback conversations about how things are working and how things are progressing is really important also. So I'll just add that.
Gio, those talk about shifting power and decolonization. What has been your experience with that, with your work with, would you want to reflect on that further?
Yeah, so at DALA, we are currently exploring participatory decolonized evaluation methods, and we had a lot of discussions on that for like challenging material inequalities, epistemological injustices, how to implement intersectional feminist approach. There are a lot we have to wrap our heads around to make sure that it is there in our methodology and our methods. But then we also have these tensions and challenge on how to balance our attempts to not being extractive and burdensome in working with partner and consultants that we have that are spread across different time zones, and then how we can have this engaging discussions and attaining analytical depth that sometimes the contracting working hours do not always adequately covers, right? So this has lead to some like methodological issues that we have tried to navigate during our projects. Like we know that if you want proper research and evaluations, and again with like methodologies that try to challenge this power dynamics, then it takes a lot of time while the contract is very time bound. So we really to achieve this high quality critical research and evaluation work at one side, while also, as Margo said, shifting power dynamics, including in the way our internal team is working, so that we're not compromising each other's well-being. So yeah, we were reflecting on that. And for example, in the fourth Natural Resources and Climate Change evaluation, we were very thankful that the Office of Strategic and Learning was very helpful in translating and mediating between different project teams and members, because we have the broader NRCC team and we have the grantees that we interview. So the way they mediate that was very helpful for us. And also we had to have this brainstorming about how to make this like still aligning with those values on our orientation to, like trying not to reproduce the problematic power dynamics. So I think I'll shut up there and let other people discuss as well. Thanks.
Jose, could you bring me back on in? And I think we'd like to open up the conversation now to everybody. We have a number of good comments and questions coming up in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function. And so I'd like to start, Brittany Dernberger, I'd love to start with you. So if you want to come off mute and I think you have a comment there that you can voice. And so I'm seeing hands and I'm seeing comments, and I will put people in the queue.
Yeah, thanks, Carlisle. It was really more of a comment than a question, but happy to have further conversation of just the point around from the very beginning, how are we making sure local partners know about these evaluation opportunities? I was just sharing that where I work at CARE, which is a large international NGO, our process for sharing RFPs tends to be pretty informal. We'll post it on LinkedIn. We'll send it to the consultants we've worked with in the past who are already on our approved vendor list, which to Kelsey's point helps because the contracting process then goes much more quickly. But I recognize that from a structural inequality perspective, that means we're leaving a lot of people out who aren't even seeing the RFP. So it was more of just a learning moment for me hearing this conversation about thinking about how we shift that. Thanks.
Thanks, Brittany. That was great. Subarna Mathis, you are up next.
I think, thanks, Carlisle. Mine was just a quick +1 to Margot's comment earlier. And I think Gio, absolutely about, we have done and really happy to hear that it has worked well. And of course, we can always improve. But the length of time and the length of time it takes to build these relationships is really important, to be able to do both feedback that we're able to give to our partners, our evaluation partners, but also to get critical feedback very much from them as well. So I think that was just the +1 to Margot about the value that we place on making that as possible.
Thank you.
As much as possible, yeah.
Thanks a ton. Maria Gerzovic, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, you had 2 comments in there. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Right. Hi, I think everyone knows me by those who know me by Florencia, which is my middle name as opposed to my first name. Nice seeing you all. So 2 comments. One, sorry, I joined late. I was in another meeting. But I was wondering if there had been any reflections about what funders can do collectively to address some of those structural barriers that concern us or get in the way of individual evaluators. I think every time I talk with another solo or individual evaluator, like the amount of time we talk about how we troubleshoot around IP and authorship and being invisibilized, it's like super salient. And it's a big barrier to us being able to have an equitable relationship. And us negotiating individually contractual clauses with lawyers of foundations, it's a very big ask. So anyone doing anything anymore kind of like to address the market barrier, right? And there are others along those lines, right, that we all know are a problem. So that's the first question. The second question is, I wonder, I'm a member of the independent evaluation panel of the Global Fund against AIDS, malaria, and TB. And the Global Fund, along with other global health initiatives, has been issued an RFI to try to find ways to attract more evaluators from low and middle income countries. There's been a joint statement of GHIs. So I wonder if anyone has even seen this, because sometimes these are very siloed worlds between foundations and GHIs. So if anyone had thoughts, that would be useful.
Thanks, Flora. Okay, Kelsey and Margot, do you want to respond to Flora? Kelsey and then Margot.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that it's a very good point. I think that so as much as possible, we do try to, so we share all of our evaluations on our websites. We also share them on the evaluators' websites if they would like to use them. So if you can go on the most of the consultants that we have, and the work is there. We also don't require them to use any branding or anything from Ford's side, because we recognize this as their product, as something they produced and that we will highlight on our website, but it is very much owned by the people that produce the document. So I know as much, I don't know, and I won't pretend like I know all of the exact contractual language within our legal, so I can get back to you on that. But I think that as much as we can, we try to see it as a shared product. Again, unless there are, and I don't think that and Lindsay and Gio can speak to this too, but if there are sensitivities that we need to keep internal, I think then we try to do that. And share a version that is safe to share externally, but yeah, as much as possible, trying to see it as a shared product. And Gio and Lindsay, feel free to jump in.
I'll just add to that, beyond kind of the primary deliverable, we have recently created a request form for intellectual property where a consultant might be interested in continuing to produce beyond what was required as part of the contract, and trying to recognize the value of that for multiple reasons, and create a, as streamlined as possible process for considering what that means in terms of, safety and security issues that we have around, in particular, our partners and the work that they're doing. So we have tried to kind of create a way for consultants to be able to think about intellectual property beyond even the actual consultancy.
Super helpful, Margot. Thank you. Next up on the list, we have go ahead, Lindsay. Yeah, sorry.
One second, and this
Sure.
is more for Florencia, just kind of an underscore and a +1. Ford didn't request or require any sort of insurance, proof of insurance, which I very much appreciated. But like a plea to funders, I understand if it's a requirement, but like making it clear in the proposal and contracting process, because occasionally, often, almost always, it requires purchasing some sort of like insurance that I didn't have, and it becomes this added cost that you can't go back and change the budget once it's gone through. So even just like making that really clear, like these are the kinds of insurances we require, would be incredibly helpful, and so it could be built into the budget at the front end.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was super helpful. Next up on the list, I have Elizabeth. Is it McCarroll? Are you there?
Hi, yes, hi, I'm here, everyone. Yeah, I just had a question around language justice. I think that it was Margot who briefly mentioned the fact that that is, something that her organization has tried to work a little bit about it. So I was just wondering whether there is anything else that other organizations have done, any promising practice, and what could be inspiring for others also to consider. Thank you.
Margot.
Yeah, this is a very long conversation in terms of like lots of lessons learned, really trying to kind of put into practice and learn along the way. So I've had two different versions, one where the consultants were able to conduct meetings in English, but all of the deliverables were in the language in which the evaluation was being conducted, which was not English. And so they did come into spaces where a team had a range of different languages that were being used and used English, but all of the deliverables did not require English. And then I've had a consultancy that was had no English language requirements at all, and I supported the use of interpreters and translators to support the evaluation because I did not speak the language that the evaluators spoke.
Super helpful, Margot. Thank you. Liz Kruger, it's wonderful to have you here. You had a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And sorry that I was a few minutes late joining. Yeah, I had a kind of it's almost a meta question of something. We're a funding organization, and we've been thinking a lot about how we better embed equity in our evaluation, sourcing, and contracting process, and also doing a lot of experimentation over the last couple of years with that. So I noted in the chat a few of the kind of things we've been trying and testing. And my comment and question actually, I think, is a little bit of the angle that Monica later in the chat also highlighted, which is we do some of this experimenting, we're testing, we're trying different things to make things more equitable. And obviously we, at the end of the day, end up just selecting one evaluation contractor to do the work with us. And so we try to get some feedback through the person we've selected about how some of that experimentation worked for them in terms of some of the different approaches we're trying. So I'm really interested though in what others are doing in their practice to get some feedback from maybe the consultant partners who weren't selected. And what really is making a difference in terms of what funders are experimenting and trying. And this really gets to Monica's point about the firms or the people who are bidding on work, they're uncompensated through the process. And so we're really conscientious about what happens then when we're asking for even more information, even when they haven't been selected for the work. So just a question about kind of particularly advice from those who work with funders. As a funder, what could we be doing to get your input, and what's the way to do that in a low burden, but still high value way?
Yeah, and maybe first to Margot and Kelsey, and then Gio and Lindsay, you might have had some experience with that.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I think, this is something that is difficult in terms of being often a one-person team and trying to do all of the things I wish I had time to do. And have used a lot of the amazing resources like this paper that outlay some best practices and kind of put them into place and experimented with them. I'm also oftentimes not making decisions as an individual, so working with a range of different people in the programs team often. And so kind of speaking internally with other people to get feedback on what's helping them in their decision-making as part of the team that is really thinking about evaluation and how it can support their learning.
Yeah, I'll just I'll plus one to that, and I do think the time internally is always a challenge, and as many on this call face, we are small teams that support very many teams internally. And so I think what we try to do is a couple of things. And again, this is dependent on sometimes the evaluation and the scope of how many people applied. But we always write emails and trying to be as transparent in the rationale that I mentioned. If people ask for follow-up calls after we send the no email and asking for more, we say yes always. Not everyone does, but we offer that. There have been a time in one particular evaluation where we actually had phone calls with everyone that we said no to get that feedback. I will say that took a lot of time, a lot of their time, a lot of our time. I don't think that's necessarily best practice, but for that particular evaluation, we really did want to focus. We were trying some new things and wanted to really better understand the process. And so we did take time. I think we talked to like 40 different organizations to get that feedback. Again, I don't know if that is the best way to go about it, but we are still, again, like experimenting and trying things. And then I'll just say in terms of feedback along the way, and Gio and Lindsay can speak to this, but we want to better understand the process of applying, but we also really want to better understand the process throughout the evaluation of those we partnered with, of what's working, what's not, and where we still have challenges. And again, Gio and Lindsay can probably speak to, like, our timelines get stretched oftentimes. Theirs both did, for sure. That is also more time asking small firms to continue to work with us. And so, being upfront about that more and more and trying to make that more explicit in the LOI and RFP process is something we've learned from feedback that we've gotten from those evaluators. So those are just a couple of the things that we've tried, but would be open to what other people are trying and would love to learn if there are better ways to do it.
Maybe Gio and then Lindsay. Have you been invited to provide feedback? And go ahead.
Yeah. So as I said before, in the selection process, when we're working on the proposal, Ford invited us to have these comments and reflections of each of the evaluation questions and assumptions. And perhaps that helps to find out whether we're fit to have to be like thought partner together without being burdensome, because we have this 3 to 5 page long proposal, I guess, that we put our thoughts there in concise way, but there are also spaces to see if what we think about the evaluation questions and assumptions are fitting or matching with their needs. And then to go on Kelsey's points, yeah, the evaluation was supposed to be 9 months, and it ended up to be around a year due to the complexity, the scale, and also because it's the first evaluation for the natural resources and climate change program. So we have this expectation management and adjustment. And when we needed more resources to do the data analysis, Ford was actually the one who were sensitive enough and noticing, and then offered the cost extension when they see that DALA needed more than we planned. For example, when we said that we had gone beyond what was budgeted in the contract to not compromise the analytical depth, they offered that cost and timeline extension. So we think this is another real indication of the partnership we had. And also an important point is this willingness to co-evaluate together the cost and resources we need in the implementation of the evaluation project, and if it ever goes beyond what we planned. Go to Lindsay, I guess. Thank you.
I think in terms of feedback after our original no from Ford, I think that there was an offer for if we wanted to have a call in order to get feedback on our proposal that we very much appreciated and took them up on. And again, it was part of the relationship building, I think, actually. And they also asked for our feedback on the process at that time, but it felt very equitable in that we were offering each other feedback instead of it just being about us providing feedback to the foundation, which I really appreciated. And I think we've had mixed experiences with other foundations in that same context. And I just kind of want to +1 to what Gio said about the extension of timelines and then budgets. I think especially as a small firm, when you're really trying to like manage timelines of different projects and budgets of different projects. When a project, the budget stays the same, but the timeline gets extended, especially if it's because of accessibility to like the program team or to the foundation staff, it can be really hard from an administration and budgeting perspective for a small firm when things are like a little tight. So just being, acknowledging that didn't happen in our experience with Ford. I really appreciate they stuck to our timeline because I was going out on maternity leave and I was like, it has to be done before July 1st. I remember it, and everyone really did a ton of extra work, I think, to keep it on that timeline, which I appreciate. But just in general, I think these timelines can kind of extend and extend and extend, and really appreciate you hearing that, in the experience of Ford, that there was an acknowledgement that can be hard for the evaluating firm and that it may also require some additional budget.
Thank you, Lindsay. Han, you've been so patient. So thank you so much for waiting through the queue. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to thank you, Carla, and for doing this. I think this is such an important topic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Carla and Hippolyte, for just raising this as a topic. Is so important, and it's made me reflect a lot about my experience. I come from a background of having done 20+ years of being at a small firm as an evaluator, and then 7+ years doing being a commissioner of evaluations, and then now back as an independent consultant. So having those multiple perspectives really makes me think about what does it take to have the kind of relationship that really does work on behalf of communities. And what I'm hearing from you is that you're trying to create something that is a humane process, because it's very difficult doing this kind of contracting work. And it is a business relationship. But on the other hand, what is the equivalent of a trust-based relationship we're not doing all grants, we're doing contracting, but still there is this element of once you're a consultant, you're almost not human, like you're a machine trying to produce something. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I kind of, as I was reflecting upon your open letter and also the comments, that there are 3 categories that I was thinking about. One is the matching process. What can be thinking about what is the structure and what is the capacity. So I wanted to just share some comments and reflections. First is, and the other thing I would recommend is, in addition to your open letter, it'd be great to get the funder's perspective in terms of what they go through and what challenges they face, because there are a lot of kind of policies and structural barriers that I had to contend with being inside a large foundation and trying to move things. So that said, the threshold for competitive bid, that was always a struggle because I always thought it was too small. And if we're going to have people go through a competitive bid process, should it be 400K? It depends on, the capacity of the foundation, but it has to make it worthwhile to go through some sort of competitive bid process. And I do want to compliment the Ford Foundation and its LOI process, because I think it does minimize, although it still takes a lot more to write a 1 or 2 pager, as opposed to like 5 pager. And then the other thing is, like, what's that process of getting to know each other? Because if you're new to the relationship, that's so important. So is there thinking around a phased approach where you have a planning or some sort of a process of getting to know each other first and then going more deeply into if it's a multi-year, especially project. So I often find that very helpful, just some sort of because when you're in a competitive process, it's always kind of like they want to get the contract, and so there is this sense of grandstanding to before the real relationships are being done. Another one is, I know that the most resource intensive, and this is the equity piece, is always around building relationship with communities, the grantees. So how can funders think about really investing that upfront and not rushing into things? And so relationships are so much better in evaluations when you have that opportunity. And then this whole closed network for equity piece. I know funders really get to know those, and there's always the pressure. You got to get out and get more people on the database so that you can hire a more diverse set of people. There's always that tension between the track record that you have and expanding the role of the RFPs that you can send it to. But in the end, what I think has been so important in a lot of my relationship with funders as an evaluator is, can we create that kind of ongoing relationship so that you feel comfortable enough as an evaluator to speak truth to power? And I can't say how difficult that is, because some of the feedback is so hard. And if it's about holding the foundation equally accountable to the work as it is the grantee partners in a portfolio approach, how can we create those kinds of conditions? On the structure, it's so much easier to give grants than contracts. So I think it'd be interesting for foundations to weigh in that perspective, just in terms of the difficulty of finding the dollars and being able to really structure it in a way that has that upfront payments and all those things that make it much easier, less intensive around reporting. And then the last one, I just want to acknowledge around capacity that I always look for, is there a real sense versus false sense of urgency? Because I think the capacity to do the work, to turn things around, to meet the reporting deadline always seems like we need the work done yesterday. And with small firms and independent contractors, that capacity gets even less in terms of turning things around within a few months versus like having a 6 or year-long relationship. So thinking about, within the capacity, just the last comment is the set aside for small contractors or independent. Can we do that? And then could we think about the kind of relationships around partnerships? Small firms being the lead on some contracts with larger firms behind them, or vice versa, that they capitalize on each other's strengths. So I know I had a lot to say, but just want to really appreciate all the things that you're raising. And then how can we get to some of the harder conversations around this kind of relationship so that the quality work is being done?
And we look forward to continuing this conversation. This is absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. I realize we're at 5 till. And so Hippolyte, over to you to reflect on all this wonderful feedback we've gotten from everyone and to wrap us up. Oh, are you muted? You might be muted.
Sorry. I'm seeing from the chat that people really appreciate this conversation, and we, as the ones who are leading this and all the people supporting us, we appreciate the conversation, your participation as well. I think our original idea of deepening the discussion around this topic is actually taking shape, and we're all learning a lot. There have been several things that have come up for a wish to deepen that, as we said at the beginning. This is the second in a series of webinars that we'll be organizing. We anticipate having one or two more before the end of the year. So please be on the lookout for that. I'm sure a lot of people have questions that have not been answered or have not been put on the chat box, or you may have questions later on that you want to reflect on. Please feel free to shoot us an email. We'll be glad to respond directly to your questions or take them up in the next series of webinars if there's a broader audience for that. Our letter that we mentioned and Anne was referring to is still available we shared a link through the emails that we send. Please reread it, and if you have further thoughts, further inspirations, or on issues that we should be looking at further in other meetings, please let us know, and we'll be happy to do that. Stay tuned for the next set of events. We will be bringing out the notices as soon as we can figure out the exact timing and then what the issues to focus on. We'll bring out that notice, and we appreciate your continued engagement on that. Come join us. We have a little form that we'll be sharing for you to fill out in case there are specific issues that you would like us to follow on straight away. Please fill out the form and send it to us, and then we'll be sure to contact you. We will be making contacts with you individually as a need arises, to see in what ways we can further work on this and deepen the relationships and the discussions. So on that note, I'll turn over to Julia, so that she'll take it from there. Julia.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick anecdote to close us out. And I just want to thank everybody for just another wonderful, very practical and helpful conversation. I think it was last year I was having a conversation with a very large funder, a foundation based in the US, and they had put out an RFP, and we're interested in getting small firms to bid for the RFP, and none did. And so they were asking me, I work for a small firm and always have, but we're asking why didn't any small firms respond to this? And so we had a conversation about the fact that for small firms or solo contractors, every decision that you make has a huge impact on the work that you do. You can only carry a small number of projects typically at one time. And if you make a bad decision, or if there's a bad partnership, or for whatever that means, it has impacts for 1 year, 2 years, possibly more years. And so the attention to trust and the signals that you send up front about the partnership, about what the relationship will be like, even in the writing of the RFP, is extremely important. So I just want to end with that. And thank you so much to all of you who are working and experimenting and learning and sharing. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay.